I'd like to welcome you to the second in our series of webinars looking at the findings from the thematic report, focusing on how well all age, secondary and special schools are preparing for the curriculum for Wales. We're pleased that so many of you are interested in these findings and hope that you find this session useful, supportive and practical as you plan your journey through curriculum development. Joined today by Alan and also leaders from 4 schools who are willing to share their experiences with us today, and we'll introduce them a little later. So in the last session, we outlined the main messages from the report, what was working well and barriers to progress. Now, I realise that the visits that informed those reports took place 2 years ago. And believe me, a lot has happened since then. In the last webinar, we recognised the challenges schools have and continue to face. And we continue to appreciate that all schools and their staff are often working in challenging circumstances. And we've been hearing today from colleagues of incidences of COVID in their school. However, the main messages from the report do remain relevant. And also we're learning about what you're doing to prepare for the curriculum for Wales during our engagement calls. And we hope that we've incorporated the messages from those calls into this webinar today and that these messages are helpful to you. Now, returning back to the report, we highlighted the importance of establishing a vision for teaching and learning and the need to ensure that teaching remains of a high quality. And today we're going to focus on these in more detail. And as I said, we're joined by leaders who are willing to share their experiences as they address these specific aspects of their journey. They may have moved further along now, but they're going to concentrate just on these 2 aspects. So firstly, we're going to focus on the importance of establishing a whole school vision for teaching and the curriculum. In the report, we identified the importance of developing an ambitious vision for the curriculum and learning and teaching. We spoke about that vision being in the context of your pupils and your school community, and the importance of that vision being fully understood and shared by everyone. We also highlighted the importance of improving teaching, key enabler to curriculum reform. Now, a majority of the schools we visited back then had started to build their vision for their pupils. Many of them used the context of the 4 purposes, as well as their own school values that were established. Many schools spoke to us about thinking about the end product. They used the example, what would a pupil of our school look like? And these schools began to understand what they needed to do to enable their pupils to develop. And they used that understanding to guide and support all the decisions they made in their vision for teaching and learning. I'd now like to pass on to Adam.
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. And we just thought this would be a useful opportunity for us to talk to you about some of our findings during our engagement calls and visits during the summer term. I think firstly, it might be helpful to think about a common myth that we heard from some schools about our Eston's expectations around schools developing a vision. A number of schools we contacted believed that we expected them to develop visions for each of the AOLEs and the wider skills, as well as a whole school vision. And I think it's important to note here that we don't have a preferred, we don't expect that to happen. While if that is useful to some schools and they find it helpful, then we would look at that as part of their approach, but we don't expect it. And whilst we don't have a good approach, how to help schools go about this, we have found that where schools have a single vision for a whole school approach to curriculum and teaching that is understood at all levels, that was enabling different subject areas to develop their teaching and learning in line with that whole school vision. And that enabled them to adapt their teaching to suit their learning area while still staying true to what the whole school vision was. Another important lesson that we heard from a few schools during our engagement visits was where leaders said they found they moved a bit too quickly to whole-scale changes at departments or AOLEs level, at the AOLE level, without thinking first about their clear vision for curriculum and teaching. And this sometimes had a negative impact. And some examples of that we were told about was, one would be where one school talked about moving their whole science and technology area of learning together to plan around a theme, without first thinking about this individual subject disciplines within that and the learning that needed to take place. And another example we heard about is where schools have brought together the languages, literacy and communication department and had pupils having languages, literacy and communication individual lessons that were trying to bring languages together without first developing pupil skills in Welsh, English and the international languages well enough. These leaders told us that they found then that often led to tentative links being made between some of those areas, and they lost sight of the important subject knowledge within each individual subject area and discipline to help pupils make progress. These schools told us that they had to take a step back and think again about quality teaching in their school and to consider how their vision for curriculum and teaching could underpin that then allowed them to think about learning as a whole and think about in individual subject disciplines what they want their pupils to learn, so then they could make more meaningful links between subjects and disciplines. And I'm really grateful that schools were willing to share that level of detail with us during these visits, because we think it's helpful that if we can learn from something by sharing that with you, it will help you in your journey as you plan the curriculum for Wales. And now it's time to move on to some of the schools that we've been joined with today. And I'm really grateful for these schools being willing to share with us how they've gone about developing their approaches for vision and curriculum in their schools. And I'm going to start with Ellen Williams from Bryn Yr Efal School. She's a head teacher in Bryn Yr Efal School, and she's going to talk to us about her experiences and what's worked well for her. So thank you, Ellen, and I'm going to pass on to you now. During this presentation, please feel free to put any questions or comments in the chat, and we'll ask Ellen those at the end of her presentation. Thank you.
Diolch yn fawr iawn, a penawda i chi gyd o Ysgol Bryn Yr Efal yn Llanrug. Mae'n braf iawn i mi gael ymuno hefo chi o Wynedd. Dwi am mynd â chi ar wybdaith o sut ydym ni fel ysgol wedi matab i Gwricwlwm i Gymru a'r weledigaeth y tu ôl i hynny a gwybdaeth fyr i pnawn yma. Harwyddaidd ni yn Ysgol Bryn Yr Efal ydy gyda'n gilydd am y copa. Mae hwn yn arwyddaidd da ni wedi disblygu ar y cyd yn staff, yn lywodraethwyr a disgyblion. A dyna chi yma ar y sleid. Hwna ydy'n arwyddaidd ni. Mae hwnna wedi bod yn ei le gyda ni ers rhai blynyddoedd bellach. Ac yn syml iawn, a ni wedi'n lleoli wrth droed y Wyddfa, mae o'n golygu'n bod ni yn anelu am ragoriaeth, am y copa, ym mhob agwedd o fywyd yr ysgol, yn staff ac yn disgyblion trwy gefnogi a chydweithio hefo'n gilydd. A dyna chi Lyn bendigedig yma gobeithio o'r Wyddfa, neu mae'n edrych cweit fel heddiw mae'n ei ofn felly. Ond dyna ydy'n gweledigaeth ni yn syml iawn felly. I mi fel pennaeth, mae 4 diben cwricwlwm i Gymru yr un mor berthnasol i ni yn ein gwaith fel athrawon o ddydd i ddydd ac ydi o i'r disgyblion. A mae yna gyfrifoldeb arna i fel pennaeth i roi blaenoriaeth dwi'n teimlo i iechyd, lles a moral pawb yn y gweithle. Yn bod ni fel staff yn egwyddorol, yn uchelgeisiol, ac yn bod ni'n creu'r amodau cywir mewn ysgol i staff fod yn fentrus, yn hyderus a chreadigol mewn awyrgylch sydd yn ddiogel. A mae hynny wedi bod yn arbennig o wir dwi'n teimlo mewn oes lle mae'r pwyslais wedi bod mewn ysgolion ar ddata a mesuryddion perfformiad. Gyda hynny fel sylfaen, wrth i ni feddwl am y cwricwlwm newydd fel ysgol, ni eithon ni trwy broses o ganolbwyntio yn y lle cyntaf ar y canfas mawr a gofyn rhai cwestiynau elfennol i ni'n hunan cyn cychwyn ar y cynllunio. Yn y lle cyntaf, beth sy'n bwysig i ddiwallu anghenion dysgwyr y ganrif yma? Beth sy'n bwysig ar gyfer ein disgyblion ni yn Ysgol Bryn Yr Efal yn Llanrug yng Ngwynedd? Sut ydym ni am lunio profiadau a ddarpariaeth orau ar gyfer disgyblion? Pa brofiadau a ddarpariaeth fydd yn parhau? A dwi'n meddwl bod hynny'n beth bwysig, bod ni ddim yn lluchio bob dim allan, ond yn cadw'r pethau fydd ni'n teimlo oedd yn llwyddiannus ac yn bwysig i bobl ifanc ni. Sut da ni am weithio gyda'n gilydd i wireddu'r uchod? A pa sgiliau, pa gyfleoedd, pa modau gwaith sydd i angen arno ni fel staff i wireddu'r uchod? Yr hyn oedd yn bwysig i ni fel pennaeth oedd bod cwricwlwm i Gymru yn rhoi rhyddid eang iawn i ysgolion ddatblygu yr hyn sy'n bwysig mewn cwricwlwm i blant a bobl ifanc. Bod yn staff ni teimlo'n hyderus yn yr arweiniad a'r camau fyddwn ni'n gymryd tuag at cynllunio ar y cyd. Yn bod ni'n gweithio'n bwyllog heb rystron ormodol ac mewn modd sensitif, gan ddiogelu arbenigeddau pynciol. Sydd ydy ddim er enghraifft wedi ail-strwythuro'r gweithle. Yn bod ni'n edrych ar ddatrysiadau ar y cyd fel staff, a bod gen pawb rôl i chwarae wrth edrych a chreu'r cwricwlwm. Bod ni ddim yn cyfyngu pobl i weithio er enghraifft yn un o'r 6 maes dysgu, ac nid yn gofyn i bobl gyfrannu tuag at thema neu brosiect penodol, nid dyna'r ysbryd o gwbl mewn brifryfel. Fe hefyd sydd bod yn bwysig i ni fel pennaeth ydy creu'r amodau gwaith priodol i bobl gael yr amser priodol i gynllunio. A gyda hynny mewn golwg, mae gen bob aelod o staff CPA ychwanegol yr amserlen ers 2 mlynedd i'r dibenion hwnnw. Mae cyfarfodydd adrannol a cyfadranol yn digwydd yn ystod y dydd, ac mae cyfarfodydd nos Fawrth yn benna yn ffocysu ar yr addysgu a dysgu a cynllunio'r cwricwlwm newydd. Da ni wedi rhoi cyfleoedd i bobl gymeryd yr awennau bob lefel, bod hyn yn athrawon neu'n athrawon profiadol, i ddatblygu'r proffesiynol ac i rannu arferion da. Ac un enghraifft o'r hynny cyn Covid oedd ddaru ni glustnodi wythnos drws agored lle roedden ni gyfle i bawb ar bob lefel fynd i'r sylwi gwahanol wersydd pobl yn ei cynnig i weld gwahanol agweddau'r cwricwlwm ar waith ac i ddysgu o hynny. A mi oedd hynny yn brofiad arbennig iawn ac yn llwyddiannus iawn. Felly'n syml iawn, yr hyn da ni wedi bod yn ei wneud ydy arbrofi, arfarnu ac addasu. Be sy'n bwysig, wrth gwrs, yn wraidd yr holl hyn i ni o ran cwricwlwm i Gymru ydy yr addysgeg a'r pedagogiaeth. Ac i ddyfynnu y sleid yma o cwricwlwm i Gymru hun, dylai'r broses o gynllunio cwricwlwm ar gyfer dysgwyr o bob oed a gallu fod yn seiliedig ar egwyddorion addysgegol. Mae'r rhain yn adlewyrchu tystiolaeth ysbys am addysgeg effeithiol. Mi rydym ni yn ystod brifryfel wedi datblygu polisi a model addysgu a dysgu effeithiol sydd wedi seilio ar egwyddorion pedagogaidd y cwricwlwm newydd. Os allwn ni mynd ymlaen i'r sleid ni na i ddangos i chi y model hwnnw. Na ni, diolch yn fawr iawn. Y polisi hwn a'r model hwn ydy'r sylfaen i holl addysgu ar draws yr ysgol. Ac mae'n torri'r broses dysgu ac addysgu lawr i gamau penodol a lligwydd mewn un gwers neu ar draws cyfres o wersi. A mae'n disgybl ni ran allweddol o'r broses yna ac yn deall y drefn. Felly, os gwelwch chi'r 6 cam, da ni yn edrych i baratoi ar gyfer y dysgu yn y lle cyntaf. Da ni'n cytuno chyfod disgyblion o ddeilliannau dysgu, cyflwyno gwybodaeth newydd, cyfleoedd i ddatblygu dealltwriaeth gan y disgyblion, i disgyblion arddangos yr hyn maent wedi ddysgu ac i adolygu ar ddiwedd y broses. Ac os o'n i mlaen y sleid nesaf, y tu allan i'r cylch, be welwch chi, rhywbeth arall sydd yn oed o bwysig yn barn ni, ac i fynd yn ôl i ysbryd y ddogfen cwricwlwm i Gymru, a dwi'n dyfynnu o'r ddogfen yma, bydd y weledigaeth yn cydnabod rôl hanfodol yr amgylchedd dysgu wrth gefnogi dysgu effeithiol. A mi welwch chi gobeithio o ran allanol y cylch hwnnw, pwysigrwydd cyson a pharhaus ymddygiad athrawon effeithiol ar lawr dosbarth ac ymddygiad dysgwyr effeithiol. Mae yna lawr iawn o waith wedi cael ei wneud gyda ni i fodelu ac i rannu disgwyliadau am hynny ymysg y staff ac ymysg y disgyblion eu hunain. A mae'r cod ymddygiad sydd yn ei ysgol Brynrefel wedi ei llunio ar sail hynny. Felly, yn syml iawn, mae'r addysgeg wedi arwain yn prosesau ni o gynllunio ar gyfer y cwricwlwm ac yn sylfaen i'r canfas. A mi welwch chi fan hyn cyfleoedd yn athrawon ni fod yn paratoi ac yn cynllunio ar gyfer y cwricwlwm. Ac yn cydweithio mewn gwahanol grwpiau, yn amldisgyblaethol, ar draws gwahanol adrannau ac yn y blaen, i ddod i fyny hefo'r cwricwlwm mwyaf addas, mwyaf cyffrous a perthnasol i'n pobl ni. Da ni wedi buddsoddi amser a creu'r amodau hynny fel o'n i'n sôn ar draws y 6 maes dysgu. Da ni wedi ceisio harnesio egni syniadau ac arbenigedd bawb i lunio'r cwricwlwm yma. Ond hefyd, fel ni'n sôn yn gynharach, wedi diogelu rhanna'r cwricwlwm o'r oeddwn ni'n falch ohonyn nhw hefyd. Ond mae'r cydweithio hwnnw wedi bod yn hynod o bwysig ac wedi gweithio'n effeithiol i ni. Mae'r disgyblion hefyd eu hunain wedi bod yn rhan allweddol o'r broses, ac ar y sleid nesaf mi welwch chi'n plant ni yn brysur yn y cynorthwyo ni i lunio'r cwricwlwm. Un enghraifft o hynny ydy y gwaith mae'r disgyblion ni wedi wneud, mi welwch chi'n y munud, bod nhw wedi cyfrannu tuag at lunio gwaith yn y maes iechyd a lles. A wedi llunio mwy na lai ar hyd efo'r athrawon y cyfres o brofiadau sy'n rhwng efo'r gwaith hwnnw. A nhw gyda llaw sydd wedi dod i fyny efo'r arwyddau o logo bach welwch chi ar y sleid nesaf. Dwi'n iach, dwi'n gry, dwi'n glen. A mae hwnna wedi bod yn brosiect llwyddiannus iawn gyda ni, da ni falch ohono fo. I mi, mae'r agwedd gyrfau a byd gwaith hefyd yn ran allweddol o gynnwys yn cwricwlwm ni, gan gychwyn ym mlwyddyn 7. Mae'n bwysig yn ymbarn ni bod pobl ifanc yn datblygu sgiliau, cyflogadwyedd, busnes ac entrepreneuriaeth yn fuan yn ein pobl ifanc ni. Os ydych chi ymlaen i'r sleid nesaf, mi welwn ni fanna y dystiolaeth o'r fframwaith gyrfau a byd gwaith i gefnogi hynny. Fel pennaeth, dwi'n teimlo yn gry iawn am yr agwedd yma. Hwna ydy'n pwrpas ni ar ddiwedd y dydd, i paratoi'n pobl ifanc ni i fynd ymlaen i addysg bellach ac i waith ar ddiwedd y dydd. A mi ydyn ni wedi buddsoddi tipyn amser yn gwahodd cyflogwyr a diwydiannau lleol i fewn i gyfrannu i ddatblygu yn cwricwlwm ni. A da ni'n falch iawn o'r gefnogaeth honno. Os ydych chi'n mynd i'r sleid nesaf, mi welwch chi wr bonheddig o'r enw Ben Jones. Dwi'n meddwl os ydych chi'n gefnogwyr pêl-droed ac yn gefnogwyr pêl-droed Chelsea. Ond mae Ben Jones yn gyn-ddisgybl i ni yma yn Ysgol Bryn Refel. Da ni'n falch iawn ohono fel. A mae'r gwaith da ni wedi bod yn gwneud yn ddiweddar mewn y blwyddyn 7 wedi ei llunio gwmpas profiadau Ben Jones o weithio fel dadansoddwr perfformiad chwaraewyr tîm pêl-droed Chelsea. A mae'r gwaith yna yn waith rhif, yn waith gwyddoniaeth, yn waith y celfyddydau mynediannol, yn waith iaith, iechyd a lles, cymhwysedd digidol a gyrfau wedi i'w gweu i'w gilydd i greu gobeithio i prosiect cyffroes iawn. Ac yn agor gorwelion gyweithio yn disgyblion ni i'r posibilrwydd o waith mewn gwahanol feysydd fel mae Ben Jones wedi profi yn llwyddiannus yn ddiweddar yma. Wrth gwrs, agwedd arall holl bwysig i ni ydy'r cysylltiadau sydd gynnon ni hefo'n ysgolion cynradd mwyn sicrhau'r continiwm yn y dysgu. Mae hwn wedi bod yn allweddol i ni fel ysgol, mae gynnon ni berthnasau cadarnhaol iawn hefo yn ysgolion cynradd. Da ni wedi datblygu nifer fawr o brosiectau cyffroes hefo nhw, a hefyd wedi bod yn gweithio ar y polisi addysgu a dysgu effeithiol hefo nhw. Ac mae nifer o prosiectau yma yn mynd ar draws sawl disgyblaeth fel y gwelwch chi fanna hefo prosiect Rita Gawr. Ac yna ar y sleid nesaf, mi welwch chi enghraifft arall o brosiect sydd wedi bod yn llwyddiannus iawn, lle roedd athrawon cynradd ac uwchradd yn cyd-gynllunio gwaith, oedd yn cychwyn yr ysgolion cynradd y dalgylch ac yn gorffen efo diwrnod hwyliog iawn brwydr y bygis yma yn Ysgol Bryn Refel, hefo staff uwchradd a cynradd yn dysgu ochr yn ochr efo'i gilydd. Y disgyblion yn cael cyfleoedd wedi datblygu sgiliau pwysig iawn yn y byd dylunio, cyfrifiadureg, cymhwysedd a digidol, peirianneg a datrys problemau. A di orffan yn syml iawn ar hyn o bryd, mae'r cynllunio y treialu a'r arbrofi yn parhau yma Bryn Refel. A fel pennaeth, mae hynny wedi bod yn bwysig iawn i mi. Wrth holi barn disgyblion a monitro gwaith, mae ni wedi bod yn gadarn hefyd wrth darganfod bod amball beth ddim wedi bod yn llwyddiannus, neu amball dasg neu brofiad ddim wedi bod o unrhyw werth i ddisgyblion. Fel pennaeth, dwi angen bod yn falch ac yn hyderus bod y cwricwlwm ydym ni'n gynnig i bobl ifanc y gorau y gallwn ni gynnig. Felly, bod byddwn ni gynllun cwricwlwm drafft mewn lle, ni fyddwn ni'n parhau i ddatblygu, i arbrofi ac i ddireinio dros y blynyddoedd nesaf. Diolch yn fawr.
Thank you very much for that, Ellen, and we really appreciate your input. I particularly welcome that we can see those links between talking about the importance of the whole school vision around curriculum and teaching, valuing subject knowledge and subject-specific approaches, whilst also working with teachers to think about the broader aspects. What I'd like to do now, just if anyone has any specific questions for Ellen, I'll just pause for a moment or two if there were any to pop in the chat. What we'll do is we'll take more general questions at the end, but if there is any specifics for Ellen, please ask now. If there's nothing immediately, we can move on and always come back to Ellen shortly. Okay, at the moment, I can't see any questions in the chat. So what we'll do, if that's okay with you, Ellen, we'll come back to you if people have a chance to reflect and think of questions during the next presentation. Okay, so I'm now going to move on to our next school, who's talking about the same theme, the same as Ellen has just talked about the importance of that clear vision for curriculum and teaching and how they've gone about approaching this. So I'm now going to welcome Bishop Vaughan School, and they've tried something different for today. And whilst Emma Pohl, the head teacher, is here to take questions at the end if there are any, the school has developed a presentation for us that has been pre-recorded.
Educators are dedicated to the idea of human flourishing. We want to see the young people in our care fulfil their potential by flourishing in the ways that will enable them to live their best lives. Many of us across the country will have clear answers to the question, what type of person are we trying to form? In Bishop Vaughan, that's a starting point for our teachers. The closest word that we can get to what we're trying to achieve in our school is the Greek term eudaimonia. It's more than flourishing, really. It describes a life of fulfilment, one that's well lived due to the development of character and the deployment of character virtues in daily life. We hope, as schools across Wales do, that our pupils will flourish spiritually, academically, morally and culturally. At Bishop Vaughan, we've embraced the new curriculum. It really feels as if we're being given the opportunity to develop a curriculum that reflects our purpose. We have the opportunity to bring together the why with the how and the what of teaching and learning at Bishop Vaughan. We started some time ago now looking at the why of the new curriculum, engaging in research to understand its roots and focusing on our own purpose and mission as a school in conjunction with the national mission. The why of the new curriculum was the end point of the 4 core purposes, and that resonated with our setting as our why is the formation of the whole person. We then went on to explore how we would best be equipped to fulfil the national mission and our school's own mission by focusing heavily on effective pedagogy, again using research as our starting point, and we appointed a number of research leads who regularly fed back to the wider body of staff. We're currently looking at the what for our new curriculum. What will the content be? What will we actually be teaching that will enable us to shape learners who can truly flourish and who will be equipped to be ambitious and capable, ethical and informed, healthy and confident, and enterprising and creative contributors to society?
As a Catholic school, there has always been an emphasis on character virtues. We work on the Catholic pupil profile. This is shown here, and it guides us in our aim to develop learners who are learned and wise, grateful and compassionate, curious and active, and so on. This for us has a genuine alignment with the 4 core purposes set out in the curriculum for Wales. Clearly, if we are aiming to develop learners who are ethical, as set out in the curriculum for Wales, we are simultaneously fulfilling our aim to shape learners who are wise and discerning, as set out in the Catholic pupil profile. There is a great deal of commonality. Our vision for the new curriculum, therefore, was established at an early point in our planning, as we have long had a clear view of the type of learner that we are trying to form.
It's really exciting, therefore, to see the focus that there is in the new curriculum on character development. Few global education systems reference it so explicitly. The opportunity is now there for us, then, to ensure that what we teach reflects and strengthens the why and the how of the ways in which we have always taught. While our curriculum design necessarily is grounded in the fact that we are a faith school, we hope that there are elements of what we are sharing here that will have relevance for our colleagues in all schools across Wales, as well as for our colleagues in other faith schools.
We developed a sketch note to summarise the vision that we developed as a whole staff body, following work in whole staff inset, in departments and in PLCs that were grouped according to areas of learning and experience. As you can see, it has Christ at the centre, and it broadens out to incorporate that Catholic pupil profile virtues mentioned earlier. It encapsulates the aims that we have to fulfil the four core purposes, as well as the Welsh Government's priorities such as literacy, numeracy and digital competence. As a faith school, we believe that every pupil is created Imago Dei, created in God's perfect image and likeness. And as such, we've continued our work on developing a strong, inclusive school environment, committed to excellence, equity and well-being to foreground curriculum reform. All of our work towards the new curriculum is then focused and, where necessary, as all planning work can veer in different directions at times, refocused on the principal aims set out in this sketch note.
The development of a high-quality teaching profession is one of the key enablers of the new curriculum. To transform a national mission into a school-based vision, we've worked collaboratively with a range of organisations and networks at local and national levels to provide a diverse range of learning opportunities for our colleagues. We have been preparing the ground for some time. Our professional learning programme is driven by the aim of developing a deep understanding of pedagogy. Staff morale about these opportunities is high, reflecting our school well as a learning organisation. We've developed capacity across our workforce for the challenges of curriculum design and, of course, the broader challenges on the educational horizon. We've explored cognitive science and developed opportunities for colleagues to engage with research evidence regarding effective classroom practice. Colleagues understand the reasons for curriculum redesign and generally feel well prepared to cope with the changes ahead. Every step of our vision to prepare the ground for the new curriculum has been shaped with and shared meaningfully with colleagues as we move forwards with this process together. We've also unpacked our pedagogical approaches to examine whether they authentically fulfil our aims of shaping learners who are attentive, discerning, creative, and so on. We have explored, for example, the ways in which we elicit responses from pupils through questioning and how we can make refinements to our questioning techniques to develop pupils who are learning to be truly eloquent in their responses. Having focused extensively on pedagogy, our how for the new curriculum, we then engaged in earnest in working on what our new curriculum content should actually look like.
The calendar has ring-fenced opportunities for us to work together as areas of learning experience and as a whole staff to create a curriculum that's centred on Christ, knowledge-rich, rooted in Wales, global in scope, culturally rich, aspirational, broadly chronological, containing beauty which can lift our pupils. The reason for a broad chronology, where it's appropriate to the areas of learning experience in question, is so that our learners will be able to learn how ideas, concepts and cultures evolved. And so they can draw links between these, strengthen and deepening their knowledge base.
As you can see then, at Bishop Vaughan, we haven't rushed to shape content from the outset, and we're only now engaged heavily in this work, as we felt it to be vital that our curriculum would be strongly rooted in our mission, in research, and that it should be the product of collective work as a whole staff. We feel that what we are shaping right now reflects the findings of all who have been engaged in research, the contributions of staff throughout the school, and that it is responsive to our particular context and the particular needs of our pupils.
Every school's why and how and what will be very different, but it's the recognition of this in the new curriculum that's truly exciting. We have the autonomy as schools to be really creative and aspirational in what we're doing. We also have the opportunity to take on board the advice of some key educational figures and others besides in creating an experience for our learners that will truly aid eudaimonia, human flourishing, our pupils living their best lives, having been nurtured in schools whose curricula explicitly focus upon character development as being intrinsically linked to academic development in the ways that the new curriculum for Wales allows us to do.
Okay, I'd like to thank Emma and her team for that presentation. And I think what's really interesting there, whilst we heard from two schools that may have taken slightly different routes, but actually they had core underpinning purposes that drove their thinking, and they worked with staff at all levels to develop that clear vision for what they wanted their pupils to be and for their curriculum and teaching. There are two questions that I just wanted to pose, and I think possibly both Emma and Ellen may be able to respond to these. So Emma, I'm not sure if you could pop your camera on. If I ask you first, and then we can ask, and then come to Ellen also. So one of the questions we've had is, what has been the challenge in helping all staff to understand your vision and understand the importance of that in driving curriculum change? We go to Emma first and then to Ellen, is that okay?
Hello, Ellen, can you hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Lucky that we pre-recorded. I'm just going to apologise. I've got the voices heading towards the baritone very fast, so I hope that I don't cough and splutter through this. One of the key challenges I feel in getting the vision across to all staff was making sure that they felt that they had ownership of it. It was very important that it wasn't simply my vision or Leslie's vision as the deputy head teacher that's with me on this presentation today. It was important that it was grounded in their own research and their own findings from that research. So as was referenced in our presentation, we did a lot of work. We appointed a number of research leads who then fed back to the entire staff on their findings. So it felt very much as though it was a shared vision. I have to say it hasn't been solely my vision, it's been shared. As you saw in our presentation also, obviously it's critical that our vision is rooted in the fact that we are a faith school. So it was important to align it with any existing work that we were doing. So a lot of our work was focused on character development, and we felt that the new curriculum for Wales really gave us the remit and the possibilities of moving forward with character development as a precursor and absolutely an essential sort of grounding for learning, character development, cultural development. As we've said, we want them to feel very much as though their learning is rooted in Wales, but it does extend out to cultures across with as our overarching principles for the curriculum, character development grounded in research, and then we formed our overarching principles together and worked on that. So it was very important we didn't rush at it, and it felt like everybody's vision, because everybody feels as though they're travelling in the same direction now, whether they're working, as you mentioned, as departments or as areas of learning experience. It's very much travelling in the right direction together.
Thanks, Emma. And just before I pass to Ellen, one of the questions has come in. Just how did you identify the aspects, the areas of research that you wanted to look at, Emma, when you had your research leads?
Can you hear me?
You were talking.
When we were looking at the areas of research, what we actually did was, I don't know if Leslie wants to come in here, but we actually asked the research leads, those who were interested in becoming research leads, to effectively undertake applications for those roles, and they put the areas of research interest to us as expressions of interest. I don't know if you want to Leslie can hear us.
Leslie, are you there, Leslie?
Don't worry if not, it's absolutely fine. If effectively, as I say, what we did was we put the opportunity for becoming a research lead out to the entire staff. There we go, Leslie's joining us. Interest came in from those staff, identifying what they wanted to progress with. Leslie, if you
Brilliant.
want to...
Okay. Thank you. Also, I think that the issues that sort of were emerging to us at the time was the focus on children's well-being and the focus on mental health and their academic resilience. So I think in terms of identifying certain areas, they kind of jumped out at us really from our operational running of the school, and then wider areas of research interest emerged because we were able to use up to £44,000 from our regional network grant to release staff to look at the Education Endowment Foundation toolkit. And from that release time, some members of staff then self-identified really areas of interest for them, which would strengthen their pedagogy and then sort of strengthen our collective work towards making sure that we had a profession, a workforce that felt capable then and confident to take on the challenges ahead.
Right. Thank you, Leslie and Emma, for that. If I come to you now, Ellen, just about the key challenges you faced.
Yes, I think that the main challenge that we faced here really is giving staff the confidence to be creative. Staff are used to working to a GCSE A-level syllabus, for things to be very prescriptive, and the tendency was for people to want to go down to that mode of thinking straight away and plan in that way. Rather than take a step back and actually think holistically about what were the best experiences we wanted to provide for our young people, and to encourage that creative side of people that perhaps hasn't yet flourished, but were one of the main reasons why people went into the profession in the first place, and giving people the confidence to actually take a step back and think about things and work things through rather than rushing towards planning and getting things completed. I think that's probably been the main challenge, and not people getting stressed about the whole process of things rather than taking the time to do the research, to do the preparation before launching straight into it. I think that's probably been the main challenge.
And how, just to add to that, really, you talked there about people wanting to kind of dive into content, I guess. How did you help them take that step back from just diving straight to the content?
I think looking back at the pedagogy and looking back at our values as well and what kind of young people we want was very, very important, I think. And also giving people the opportunity to look at the broader curriculum, not just people tended to be interested initially in their own areas of specialism, whereas we wanted them to take an interest in the whole curriculum, providing opportunities for people to engage in those sorts of experiences, I think was very important. And to prevent people from just then wanting to stick to their little box within their own departmental area, for example.
Okay, no, that's really helpful. Thank you very much for that. And thank you to Emma and Leslie also. Okay, I'm now going to pass on to Michelle, who will take us on to the next part of the session.
Thanks, Anne. Now, it's important to realise that no two schools' journeys are going to be the same. But we hope that you found it useful to hear those experiences, and there might be a golden nugget, an idea or an approach that you can take away and try in your context with your pupils. So now we're going to move on to our second theme of the afternoon, looking at revisiting and refining your school's approach to teaching. Now, we've recognised in previous thematic reports and also in the Chief Inspector's annual report the importance of good quality teaching. Many of the schools that we visited as part of our report already had strengths in teaching that have been identified in their most recent inspection report. But nonetheless, in planning for the new curriculum, a majority of these schools still took the opportunity to review their approach to teaching. They looked at research, they looked at approaches to teaching and curriculum design, and in light of those, reviewed their teaching and learning policies where appropriate. By focusing on the teaching and learning, these schools are starting to make strong links across their school, not through the what, not through the content, but through the how, through the craft of teaching. Now, in previous thematics, we've identified what senior leaders tend to focus on when they're improving learning. Generally, when looking at the quality of teaching, these leaders engender a culture of inquiry and engagement. We heard about engaging with research in the previous presentations. There's a trust in staff to make their own professional choices and judgment. There's an open door policy for teachers to visit each other's classrooms. Professional dialogue takes place around teaching. It's commonplace. Regularly, teaching and pedagogy is placed as an agenda item on meetings. And professional development days are used to explore initiatives in teaching and learning. Time is given to teachers to take part in peer observations and action research. And they use research to inform decisions and strategy as the school moves forward. These schools have clear policies for teaching, providing pupil feedback, and for curriculum design that all staff both understand and adhere to. And these schools establish professional relationships, both within their school and beyond their region. They seek out and act on expert advice.
And what I'd like to do again now is just talk through some of our findings from our more recent engagement with schools to our engagement calls and visits. And whilst many schools during this time shared the challenges they faced during the pandemic, they've also talked about how they've continued to place teaching at the centre of their work. They've recognised the importance of teaching in helping them to secure a clear and effective curriculum that enables their pupils to make progress. Schools have talked to us about seeing teaching as that key enabler to a successful curriculum. And where schools haven't focused closely enough on improving the quality of teaching in their school, what leaders in those schools have told us is that often teachers found it more difficult to begin to develop their subject and discipline specific pedagogies, which often has limited their ability to be able to think about how they might change and adapt things to really secure and improve pupil progress. Many schools have also begun to talk to us about how they plan to develop their assessment approaches. And in the best cases, we see schools thinking about what works well now and what will they take forward as they move towards planning their curriculum for Wales. In these cases, leaders recognise that effective assessment now will support them in the future. And if they can develop their approaches to assessment well now and support teachers to have strong and effective ways of knowing where pupils are and what they need to do to improve, that will support them as they come to develop their curriculum in the future. It helps them to know pupils' strengths and areas for improvement, and that allows teachers to plan for and cater for those different needs. And I think that's a useful opportunity to move on to our next school. Elspeth Lewis is an executive head teacher of King Henry School and Crosstalk Kylian School. And she's going to talk to us about how her schools have gone about developing and improving teaching from different starting points. So I'll now pass over to Elspeth.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm executive head teacher of King Henry VIII School, Abergavenny, and Crosstalk Kylian School, Cwmbran. If you go to the next slide, please. Two very different schools. King Henry, I've been head teacher since September 2014, 11 to 19 school, diverse student population and catchment, urban and rural, pockets of very high levels of deprivation, pockets of very high levels of affluence. and big contrasts that had to be strategically planned for. And the improvements we'd made at King Henry led to the opportunity to become the executive head teacher of Crosstalk Kylian. Crosstalk Kylian School had been through a perfect storm of change that did contribute to it being in an nesting category of special measures. Okay, next slide, please. And a detailed overview of how we improved teaching and learning at King Henry is included in the Estin Thematic Review, Improving Teaching, June 2018. As I go through my presentation, I will share how we did that, but also how that approach has changed over time as the national reform agenda has gathered pace. And so we've really been thinking about what are those pedagogical approaches we need to deliver that curriculum for Wales. But all the way through that has been what we've called the golden threads. So again, if we can go to the next slide. And, you know, and I've called them the golden threads because for me, each strand must be evident at all levels within the school, from our school development plan to our professional learning offer, our line management meetings, action points, or whatever. It has to be embedded in our daily practice. At both schools, our teachers talk about teaching and learning all the time. And both schools started at similar points, one in 2014, one in 2020. Both schools had seen a disruption to senior leadership, and therefore teachers and middle leaders lacked a sense of direction and a lack of clarity about what mattered. But it's interesting to note at King Henry staff, you know, the majority of staff that were placed in significant improvement are still at the school. And in both schools, there were pockets of exceptional practice that had not been identified or shared. And I think from my own experience as a teacher, middle leader, senior leader, you know, I have core beliefs and values around outstanding teaching and learning. That's key to me as a leader, for the moral purpose, to do the best we can for every child. We have, and for secondary schools in particular, we have to address within school variation, but also we have to constantly review and refine the range and quality of teaching approaches. You know, Dylan Williams states, every teacher needs to improve, not because they are good enough, but because they could be better. And this has become all the more important as we address these challenges, which was initially the literacy and numeracy framework back in 2014-15, and obviously now the curriculum for Wales, and developing that range of pedagogical approaches, which is so important. And the first step in both schools was to develop that shared understanding of language. What is good, excellent, good or excellent teaching and learning? At KHS, all leaders co-constructed the teaching and learning policy, and in 2015 we had a vision for teaching and a review model for ongoing self-evaluation. At Crosstalk Kylian, all staff that was then refined by the leaders co-constructed the school's learning manifesto, a vision for learning that was of course aligned to the curriculum for Wales. And that shared understanding and expectation, for me, you know, has to make sure that all teachers understand they are teachers of the 3 cross-curricular skills, but in particular, the non-negotiable for me, that all teachers are teachers of literacy, oracy, reading and writing. And it gave us an opportunity to also explore that subject-specific pedagogy. The co-ownership or co-construction was critical. It built ownership and developed the confidence to start, and the start of that shared understanding, language and expectations. It also was like, we trust you. You know, the expertise was in those schools. It just hadn't been allowed to thrive. Through the co-construction, we then started to develop our leaders and that leadership of pedagogy. And we were able to maintain and grow that leadership through developing ongoing whole school self-evaluation and development cycle that was integral. The integral was then the self-evaluation of teaching and learning. We always invited others in to quality assure our judgments, whether it be challenge advisors and other external. So, because we had to make sure our self-evaluation was accurate, so we could then identify highly effective planned professional learning. And that had 2 strands. Firstly, there was actually professional learning to undertake effective self-evaluation of teaching and learning. How do you give effective feedback? Challenging conversations. And actually by the ongoing was by doing self-evaluation of teaching and learning with SLT and middle leaders together, we started to develop that shared understanding of good, but also we were starting to develop those leaders of pedagogy. And later on, we then engaged all teachers, and that was very important. Secondly, the professional learning was then about improving aspects of teaching and learning that had been identified by that self-evaluation. We had professional learning communities, but now we've changed those to peer inquiry cycle triads, focusing on our key priorities, such as marking, assessment and feedback, MAT, literacy, numeracy, regular teaching and learning briefings every week, and professional learning every week, but also then putting that targeted support in for those areas where there was weak pedagogy. And we also then try to ensure there's synergy across everything we do in the school, whether it's the school development plan, PAP, performance management objectives. We were also brave enough sometimes to say no to other development activities, because we had this real clarity about the need to improve teaching and learning. Since 2014, we have addressed that Welsh Government National Mission, but it has been a very, very gradual process. And over time, that has changed and morphed. We go to the next slide just to take you through a little, and I'm going to speak briefly about King Henry. We didn't actually have a recommendation to improve teaching, but we could not address our recommendations without addressing this. And at the starting point, we had a significant investment with staff on developing that teaching and learning policy, and then what was an agreed peer review cycle. That ran for 2 years. And after that, we then met with middle leaders and we co-constructed the next 2 years. And what we did then was bring in all teachers, because middle leaders said it's been so beneficial to their practice. Actually, we need everybody to do this. However, at the end, as we were coming to the end of that cycle, what was really interesting was that we were getting to the point where we felt this peer review was too rigid. We weren't developing good teachers into excellent teachers, and we were definitely not developing the range of pedagogies we needed and were going to require for the curriculum for Wales. So through EAS, we brokered sort of a brainstorming session really with Professor McWaters, and we really totally redesigned our approach to professional learning, but also self-evaluation of teaching and learning in line with the national mission, but also the critical collaborative inquiry model. And so, and very much this is the way that we've gone forward. Again, significant investment of time in the summer 2019 with staff to design this. And we really started to move from looking at the learning that was taking place in the classroom and out of the classroom and what the students were doing. So if we look at the impact of that, and certainly, can we go to the next slide, please? It's having sustained good teaching and learning has meant that outcomes have significantly improved in the school, not only in terms of summative examinations, but also in what we were seeing in the books, but also what we were seeing in the lessons. The students were getting a varied and enjoyable learning diet, and literacy was very strong. And we were making progress against those 12 pedagogical approaches. And as you can see, also then the school had moved to become an A green school, and very strong leaders who are now working across with other schools to improve teaching and learning. We now moved on to Crosstalk Kylian school, and February 2020 they were given a the recommendation was earlier, but they hadn't made enough progress and they had to improve the quality of teaching and learning. Obviously an interesting time to start, because obviously March 2020 all schools went into lockdown. So, but using that experience, previous experience, I know it had to be owned and created by Crosstalk Kylian school staff. It's a different school, a different context, and certainly a different time. They had 3 key words though: learning, respect, ambition, and we kept those. And through the regional consortia, I managed to call in a few favours, and again, we secured the services of Mick Waters, and we undertook us in lockdown, all over Teams, and sometimes Mick froze, but we spent a whole week in June looking at the curriculum for Wales, looking at the 4 purposes, and what are those pedagogical approaches across the school, but also subject-specific pedagogy that were required. And together with Mick, and then with the extended leadership team, we crafted our learning manifesto. And that's more than it's a vision. It then sets out very clearly that we seek learning, we expect respect, and we applaud ambition. And after that, it's really explicit about what types of teaching and learning we expect at the school. It's never finished, it's a live document, and of course, all aligned to the curriculum for Wales. Subsequently, staff then agreed to a peer review model and a peer inquiry model. And, so we have the whole school approach, middle leaders doing self-evaluation, but then we have our peer inquiry cycle where staff work in triad, focusing and researching a particular aspect of pedagogy. Staff feedback to those has been, they feel really empowered and very positive about that. And obviously we continue professional learning to drive this. So the impact, it's really funny, people are quoting the learning manifesto in leaving speeches last summer. They really are really engaged, really good understanding, shared understanding. That we had some external, we had EAS in before the end of the summer term. The books are better. And my goodness, if we can do that during a period of global pandemic, we're not finished, not by a long way, but we know where our best practice is now. We're sharing that. And there's been a real growth in our leaders of pedagogy. So if we can just go on to the last slide then. So, really just looking at the lessons learned, and really that continuous self-evaluation and development cycle has to be embedded in the life of the school. And the idea that you continually change that to align to the national reform agenda. As I say, we've always had people in to make sure that we're not over-egging the pudding, because I think it's really important. We've got a really honest view of the standards evident in our lessons. We keep the main thing. For both schools, teaching and learning is our core purpose, and we work very hard on that. And I try not to, and I will say no. Like, for example, King Henry's moving to a new build. Well, I'm still focusing on the here and now, because that is really, really important. We always review and refine, and that's whatever our self-evaluation model is, we come back every 2 years to have a look at that, underpinning it then by that high quality professional learning. And we've done it all with our staff. The expertise was there. We've brought in, apart from Professor Mick Waters, who makes us think and ask awkward questions, we've done it with the staff that were in the school, and we've trusted them. So that's a whistle-stop tour of how we've been preparing for the curriculum for Wales, but particularly focusing on those pedagogical approaches, which I think have then informed the curriculum design and assessment that we're working hard on now. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Elspeth. That was really useful, and a really clear overview of how you've moved to improve teaching. And I think what was important there is how you talked about trusting teachers to make the right choices, but also underpinning that by professional learning to help them to move forward. And I welcome as well that you talked about how important it was to help teachers realise it's not just about the end, the very end, about the outcomes of Key Stage 4. It's about making sure it's underpinned by good quality progress the whole way throughout school. So really welcome that. I'm just going to give a second or two to see if we have any questions. And if not, what I'll do is do as we did before. We'll move on to Bryn Tower School, and then come back to Elspeth and Rhian if there are any questions then. Okay, I can't see any questions. So for now, Elspeth, if that's okay, I'll thank you once again for a really useful input. And now we'll move on to our next school. So I'd now like to welcome our next school. Rhian is the assistant head teacher in Bryn Tower School. And Rhian is going to talk to us about how they've moved teaching on into their next stage of their development. So I'm going to pass over now to you, Rhian, and look forward to this. Thank you.
Diolch yn fawr. A gai ymddiheuro I ddechrau am safon y llais y prynhawn yma. Mae'n bythefnos I mewn i'r tymor a mae'r llais yn gwegian yn barod. Ond prynhawn da I chi gyd, a diolch yn fawr iawn am y cyfle I siarad gyda chi gyd y prynhawn yma. Wir wedi mwynhau y cyflwyniadau I ni wedi cael yn barod ac yn sicr mae'n gysylltiad amlwg byddwn ni'n gweud rhwng falle rhai'r pethau dwi'n mynd I drafod y prynhawn yma gyda'r cyflwyniadau I ni wedi cael yn barod. Felly dwi'n mawr obeithio bod y diffyg llais yn ddim yn mynd I amharu ar y sain y prynhawn yma. Felly I ddechrau felly, nawr ychydig o gyd-destun yr ysgol I chi. Os allwn ni fy mlaen i'r sleid nesaf os gwelwch yn dda. I'r un ohonoch chi sydd falle ddim yn gyfarwydd ar ysgol, I ni wedi cael ei lleoli Helan yn Nwyrain Abertawe. Mae gyda ni dros 900 o ddisgyblion erbyn hyn. Dan ysgol gymharol newydd I byddwn ni ar agor am ryw 20 mlynedd flwyddyn nesaf. Natur y disgyblion a natur yr ardaloedd I ni'n gwasanaethu yma Bryn Tawe. Mae dros 30% o disgyblion ni yn byw mewn ardaloedd sy'n cael eu hadnabod yn yr 20% mwyaf difreintiedig yng Nghymru. Dros 16% o'n disgyblion ni yn hawliau prydysgol am ddim. Dim ond 10% os hynny sy'n dod ag gartrefi lle mae Cymraeg yw cyfrwng-iaith cartref ac wrth gwrs I ni yn ysgol uniaith Gymraeg yma lle mae bob pwnc yn cael ei haddysgu drwy gyfrwng y Gymraeg. A mae dros 25% o disgyblion ni ar gofrestr anghenion addysgol ychwanegol yr ysgol. Felly, dyna chi ychydig o gyd-destun yr ysgol I chi a rhoi ychydig o wybodaeth I chi falle am broffil yr ysgol cyn I ni ddechrau. Ddiddorol fan hyn, dwi'n mynd I ail ddyfynnu y dyfyniad yma gan Dylan William. Mae wedi cael ei dyfynnu yn barod y brynhawn yma. Ond y rheswm pam dwi'n rhannu hwn falle ar y dechrau, ond dwi'n rhannu hwn gyda staff, ni'n trafod y dyfyniad yma yn gyson yn yr ysgol, oherwydd dwi wir yn credu bod y dyfyniad yma yn cwmpasu yn gweledigaeth ni yma Bryn Tawe o ran dysgu proffesiynol ac o ran dysgu ag addysgu yn benodol. If you create a culture where every teacher believes they need to improve, not because they're not good enough, but because they can be even better. A dyna dwi'n meddwl, fel o'n i'n sôn, dyna'r weledigaeth sydd gyda ni a dyna sy'n greiddiol falle i'r hyn I ni ceisio I gyflawni o ran dysgu proffesiynol a dysgu ac addysgu yma Bryn Tawe. Os a fi nôl felly chydig flynyddoedd I roi chydig o gyd-destun I ble roedden ni beth flynyddoedd yn ôl erbyn hyn. Os allwn ni jyst mynd mewn i'r sleid nesaf, sgwylwch yn dda. Mi oedden ni defnyddio system portal, system gyfrifiadurol, oedd yn coladu ein harsylwadau ni dros y flwyddyn. Felly, bydden ni'n mynd mewn I wersi fel uwch dîm, bydden ni yn graddio wedyn agweddau gwahanol o wersi, a mae gyda chi'r rhestr yn fyna o ymddygiad ar gyfer dysgu, I her a disgwyliadau, I asesu a chynnydd ac yn y blaen. Felly, bydden ni'n mynd mewn I wersi ac yn graddio gwersi wedyn ar sail ar agweddau hyn. A bydde'r system gyfrifiadurol yma yn creu graffiau hyfryd, lliwgar, pert I ni I ddadansoddi, ac mi oedd y system yna yn system hynod ddefnyddiol. Ond y reality oedd wrth gwrs, oedd y graffiau yna, ond yn rhoi darlun I ni o 2 wers y flwyddyn gan bob un aelod staff. Felly, o'n i'n edrych ar y graffiau yma yn cwestiynu felly a oedd y system yma, a oedd y raglen hyn ar arfarniodd gyda ni wirioneddol yn rhoi'r darlun cyflawn ac yn rhoi cyfle I ni I wir I symud dysgu ac addysgu ymlaen yn yr ysgol. Mae rhaid fi bwysleisio, mi oedden ni mewn sefyllfa gre, o'n i'n lwcus iawn yn hynny o beth, ac felly y cwestiwn mawr i ni yn yr ysgol oedd i ble ni'n mynd nesaf, i le rawn ni felly, i ba gyfeiriadau mae angen i ddatblygu dysgu ac addysgu ymhellach. A dyn ni ddim yn teimlo bod y system oedd gyda ni wir yn rhoi darlun cyflawn ac yn caniatáu i ni wneud hynny. Felly ar sleid nesaf, mae gyda ni falle grynodeb o'r camau i ni wedi cymryd dros, byddwn ni'n dweud dros y 5 mlynedd diwetha. Newid meddylfryd staff yn fwy na dim oedd un o'r pethau mwyaf. Ffocws ar wella ac nid gwirio. Nawr, chi'n mynd mewn i weld y gwersi, gallwch chi fod yn trafod y wers ac yn rhoi adborth adeiladol ac yn eistedd gyda'r staff am gyfnod hir o amser. Ond ar ddiwedd y sgwrs yna wedyn, y cwestiwn o'ch chi o hyd yn cael oedd, ond be ges i? Oedd y wers yn rhagorol, oedd y wers yn un da ac yn y blaen. Ac o'n i wir yn teimlo bod hynny'n tynnu oddi ar y sgwrs yna, beth oedd wir yn bwysig, a beth y ffocws o'n i'n teimlo yn bwysig, sef symud ymlaen yn hytrach na beth oedd ansawdd y wers honno mewn gwirionedd. Felly fe wnaethon ni'r cam o hepgor graddio gwersi yn gyfan gwbl. A symud wedyn gyda gwir ffocws ar ddysgu proffesiynol. Mae rhannu arferion da, fel ni wedi clywed yn barod yn prynhawn yma, wedi bod yn allweddol i'r daith yma hefyd. I ni wedi sefydlu tîmau ar draws yr ysgol, mae'r penaethiaid yn cwrdd yn gyson, mae'r penaethiaid allgraidd yn cwrdd yn gyson, nid i drafod safonau o rheidrwydd, ond i rannu arferion da ymysg ei gilydd. Do fi at amser yn y man, ond dwi'n meddwl bod yn allweddol i fuddsoddi amser. Oedd Bryn Refan yn sôn am rhywbeth tebyg iawn. Mae'n gostus, mae'n fuddsoddiad enfawr ar ran yr ysgol, ond mae'n fuddsoddiad allweddol, dwi'n meddwl, mwyn rhoi amser penodol i staff i ffocysu ar y pethau yma. Fel ni wedi gweld dros y blynyddoedd diwetha, mae ymchwil academaidd wedi bod yn dod yn rhan enfawr o'n deiet ni o ddydd i ddydd. Dwi'n fentor ar athrawon newydd a myfyrwyr darpar athrawon, ac ych chi'n gallu gweld sut mae'r proffesiwn yn esblygu ac yn newid ffocws, a mae hwnna yn bendant yn wir am yr hyn ni'n ceisio i wneud yma ym Mhryn Tawe. Mae yna ffocws mawr ar arbrofi a threialu, a bod yn ddewr a mynd amdani. Dyw pob beth ddim yn mynd i weithio, ond gobeithio bod ambell i beth yn mynd i, a wedyn gallwn ni gyd elwa ar hynny. Rannu llwyddiannau wedyn, ac yna, yn y pen draw, does dim un o'r pethau yma falle werth i halen os nad oes yna newid polisi. A dwi wir yn teimlo bod nifer o'r pethau falle yn arwain at newid polisi hir dymor, fel bod cysondeb wedyn ar draws yr ysgol gyfan. A fi nod falle i drafod rhai pethau i ni wedi trialu dros y blynyddoedd, os allwn ni mynd mlaen i'r sleid nesaf. Dwi wedi clywed y gair triawdau mae'n ddrwg gen i mwy nag unwaith yn ystod y prynhawn, ac mi oedd hon yn fan cychwyn i ni, lle wnaethon ni greu triawdau dysgu proffesiynol ymysg y staff. Mi oedd gyda chi athrawon o gefndiroedd gwahanol, o ran cefndiroedd pynciol, yn cyd-gynllunio, yn cyd-arsylwi ac yn cyd-werthuso wedyn gwersi i gilydd. Bydde bob aelod o staff yn dewis agwedd benodol o ddysgu ac addysgu, ond nhw'n awyddus i ddatblygu ymhellach a gafiat hynny mewn mwy o fanylder mewn munud. Ac creu awyrgylch hollol agored, di-fygythiad, dim gwaith papur, dim rhywun oedd yn rhywle llinell yn o'ch chi'n dod mewn i wylio ac i wirio, oedd e'n fwy o sgwrs proffesiynol ymysg yn staff ni, rannu arferion da, awgrymu ffyrdd o wella ac yna rhannu hynny wedyn ymysg staff cyfan. Felly modd hwnna, fe weithiodd hwnna'n arbennig o dda, os dwedwch chi ar y sleid nesaf. Mi oedd adborth y staff hefyd yn ganologol iawn. Chi'n gweld rhai manteision yn fyna, rhannu arferion da, dysgu technegau amrywiol, arbrofi, cael y cyfle i weld bobl eraill yn dysgu. Rhai profiadau falle bydd y staff ddim wedi cael, chymod, a neb sy'n drist falle o fewn y proffesiwn fel y goddi oedd bod chi'n gorfod cyrraedd rhyw fan penodol yn eich gyrfa broffesiynol i fynd i weld gwersi mewn pygiau gwahanol, chymod, ac oedd hwn yn ffordd i ni agor y drysau ac i wneud yn siŵr bod pob aelod o staff yn cael y cyfle i fynd mewn i wersi i gilydd mewn ffordd oedd yn hollol ddi-fygythiad. Dwi'n meddwl mae'r her fwyaf gyda'r system fel y goddi gyda ni oedd diffyg amser. Doedd yr amser yma ddim wedi cael ei amserlenni ar amserlennu'r staff, ac felly fe welon ni heriau o ran amser, mi oedd gyda ni staff oedd yn rhan amser, oedd yn codi falle mwy o heriau. Felly, chymod, oedd mor gryf oedd y cynllun, mi oedd yr her o ran yr amser yn bendant yn un rhwystyr wrth i ni ddadansoddi a gwerthuso. Felly, wrth symud ymlaen o wneud y cynllun yma am ryw 2 flynedd, fe benderfynon ni, a fel soniais i'n gynt, mi oedd yn benderfyniad costus, ond fe benderfynon ni y byddai'n rhaid i ni wedyn i fuddsoddi arian ac amser i staff i wneud i dysgu proffesiynol nhw ac i wir i gael ffocws ac i fod yn atebol wedyn am i dysgu proffesiynol i hunain. Os allai, jyst ymlaen at y sleid nesaf os gwelwch yn dda. Ond wedyn, wrth gwrs, gyda gwers ddysgu proffesiynol, mae deg i weid bod ni wedi gwneud tipyn mwy o waith ymchwil yn hunain o ran beth oedd y disgwyliadau, sut fydde hyn yn gweithio orau i ni. A mae yna nifer fawr o ddogfennau, nifer o waith ymchwil ni wedi darllen, oedd yn rhoi canllawiau ac yn rhoi syniadau cryf i ni o ran sut bydden ni yn strwythuro'r cynllun yma wrth i aelodau staff i gael y wers allweddol gwerthfawr hon ar eu hamserlen nhw yn ystod y flwyddyn. Mae yna cwbl o bethau yn ei dynnu oddi ar y dyfyniadau y sleidiau yma yn fan hyn. Mae'r dyfyniad yna, dwi'n meddwl yn gweud y cyfan, we all know that one-off inset is a flash in the pan. A dwi'n meddwl bod systemau neu cynlluniau fel ni wedi bod yn trafod y prynhawn yma, wir yn rhoi ffocws hir dymor i ddysgu proffesiynol. Dyw e ddim yn rhyw gwrs un diwrnod a dyna ni. Mae e wir yn rhoi'r ffocws ar unigolion i ffocysu ar rhywbeth dros gyfnod hirach o amser. Mae angen newid diwylliant, chymod, mi oedd e'n broses orfod newid meddylfryd diwylliant o fewn yr ysgol. A dwi'n meddwl mae un peth allweddol hefyd oedd y ffaith bod staff unigol yn cael dewis i ffocws dysgu ag addysgu unigol yna. Achos dydy bob un cynllun ddim yn mynd i fod yn addas i bawb. Mae gyda ni staff o wahanol brofiadau, sydd wedi bod yn hynod brofiadol, yn newydd, angen ffocysau gwahanol, ac mi oedd rhyw gynllun fel hyn yn rhoi'r rhyddid felly iddyn nhw i ddewis rhywbeth oedd wir yn bwysig iddyn nhw. A na i ddyfynnu Dylan William eto yn fan hyn, a neu gyfeirio at y ddogfen mewn munud. Ond mae e'n gweud yn ei ddogfen when teachers themselves make the decision about what it is that they wish to prioritise for their own professional development, they are more likely to make it work. A dwi yn teimlo bod wedi bod yn allweddol i ni wrth i ni symud y cynllun yma yn ei flaen. The only way we can improve schools, therefore, is to stop the people doing good things to give them time to do even better things. A chymod, mae'r pwynt bwled ola na fyna wedyn eto yn cyfeirio nôl at bod yn ymchwil gyfoethog. Felly, os ni'n symud ymlaen i'r sleid nesaf, mi wnaethon ni osod cynllun iddo manwl yn ei lle i staff i ddilyn. Felly, yn y tymor cyntaf, mi oedd y wers dysgu proffesiynol oedd ar eu hamserlennu nhw i fod i gael ei threulio felly yn edrych ar ymchwil penodol. Ac mi greon ni lyfryddiaeth a man canolog, lle bydde yna dolenni tuag at lyfrau, gwefannau, gwaith ymchwil o bob math o dan themau dysgu ac addysgu gwahanol, boed yn wahaniaethu i fod yn rheoli'r amgylchedd ddysgu i bob math o wahanol agweddau. Felly, oedd y tymor cyntaf yn ffocysu ar y gwaith ymchwil, oedd yr ail dymor wedyn yn edrych ar drealu, felly cymryd rhai syniadau arbrofi trealu ar lawr dosbarth. Mi oedd gan bob aelod o staff hefyd bar partner dysgu proffesiynol, felly byddai'r person yna wedyn yn gallu mynd mewn i'r wers gwersi hynny i gael y sgwrs proffesiynol yna gyda nhw. Ac yna erbyn diwedd y flwyddyn, mi wnaethon ni ofyn i bob aelod o staff i baratoi dogfen i rannu gyda gweddill y staff yn crynhoi eu canfyddiadau nhw ac yn rhannu unrhyw arferion da, unrhyw beth na ddod o'r gwaith ymchwil ac o'r gwaith o ran y daith dysgu proffesiynol ar gyfer y flwyddyn. Felly symud ymlaen i gofyn gyfieithiad falle yn y sleid nesaf. A fi'n antod at y sleid sydd i ddod. Fel soniais i'n gynt, wnaethon ni greu llyfryddiaeth, wnaethon ni greu man canolog lle bydde staff yn gallu dod o hyd i waith ymchwil. O'n i yn teimlo bod hwnna'n bwysig, mae'n iawn i weid cerwch chi wneud gwaith ymchwil ar y pwnc yma, ond o'n i wir yn teimlo i ddechrau beth bynnag bod angen llefydd penodol i'r staff i droi atyn nhw. Yn ogystal â hynny wedyn, be bynnag oedd eich ffocws dysgu ag addysgu chi, mi wnaethon ni greu wedyn rhwydweithiau dysgu proffesiynol ar sail ffocysau. Felly, fe fydde'r bobl hynny wedyn oedd yn edrych ar yr un ffocws yn ystod y flwyddyn yn cael cyfle wedyn mewn cyfarfodydd bob hanner tymor i drafod ymysg i gilydd, i ddyfynhau falle yr ymchwil a'r trafodaethau nhw wedi bod yn cael yn ystod y flwyddyn. So allwn ni ymlaen i'r sleid nesaf. A dyma'r ddogfen gan Dylan William. I ni wedi selio llawer o gwaith yma arni. Y ddogfen yma, Sustaining Formative Assessment with Teacher Learning Communities. Mae'r ddogfen hon yn rhoi crynodeb ac yn rhoi canllawiau eitha clir, ond mae ar sail ymchwil o ran sut fydde orau i roi y math yma o gynllun ar waith felly. Felly oedd gyda chi'r gwaith unigol o fewn y par, ond wedyn hefyd bydde cymunedau wedyn, bydde staff yn dod at ei gilydd mwyn trafod yr un pwnc ac mwyn rhannu mwy wedyn o arferion da ymysg i gilydd. So felly fi ymlaen i'r sleid nesaf, ac fe weithiodd hyn, bydden ni'n dadlen well fyth, yn well eto na'r cynllun triawdau. Rydych chi weld yn fyna wedyn, wnaethon ni osod y neuadd i fyny lle oedd bron y bod fel y fath o noson speed dating, lle bydde bob aelod o staff yn cael hyn a hyn o amser i rannu gyda'r aelod eraill o staff beth oedd eu taith nhw yn ystod y flwyddyn, a wedyn bydde'r gloch yn gad y canu, byddech chi'n symud ymlaen wedyn at y person nesaf. Felly ar y noson honno wedyn, mi oedd hi'n hwyrnos, byddech chi wedi gwrando ar gyfuniad mawr iawn amrywiaeth o staff yn trafod i taith dysgu proffesiynol nhw yn ystod y flwyddyn, a pa arferion o'n nhw'n awyddus i fynd ymlaen felly ar gyfer y dyfodol. So mi ymlaen falle i'r sleidiau nesaf, ac eto mi oedd yna gryfderau mawr iawn i'r cynllun yma. Ar sleid nesaf falle mae'n crynhoi y cryfderau sydd gyda ni oedd yn rhan o'r cynllun yma. Mae'n sôn falle am athrawon yn gyson yn trafod dysgu ag addysgu. Mae hwn yn rhywbeth sydd wedi codi prynhawn yma, a gobeith bod y sgwrs yna'n digwydd yn hollol naturiol drwy'r flwyddyn, bod dysgu ag addysgu ar flaen agenda bob un ohono ni. So lle jyst ymlaen at y sleid nesaf, os gwelwch yn dda. Oedd atebolrwydd yn rhywbeth o'n i'n teimlo oedd yn bwysig. Mi oedd disgwyl i staff i gyflwyno rhywbeth, oedd disgwyl iddyn nhw i rannu i canfyddiadau nhw fel bod rhywbeth iddyn nhw ei anelu ato fe erbyn diwedd y flwyddyn. Oedd yna ethos yna o ddatblygiad parhaus, a mae'r dyfyniadau mae gyd yn dod oddi wrth y staff pan wnaethon ni roi holiadur iddyn nhw ar ddiwedd y cynllun. Amser yn cael ei roi i staff, a mae'r un ola na falle yn dweud y cyfan, sicrhau bod ni fel staff yn gyson ar flaen y gad o ran y gwaith ymchwil a'r strategaethau diweddaraf i'w defnyddio ar lawr dosbarth. A fel wedys i, mae'r pwyntiau mae gyd yn dod o'r staff eu hunain. Felly wnaethon nhw werthfawrogi y cyfle i gael y rhyddid, i ddewis os nhw eu hunain, i fod mewn reolaeth falle o'i dysgu, o'i taith nhw o ran dysgu proffesiynol i wella yn broffesiynol hefyd. Ond fe welon ni falle gyda'r cynllun yma mewn gwirionedd oedd bod gyda chi rhyw 50 o astudiaethau ymchwil bach oedd yn cael ei gweithredu falle ar lefel unigol, a dwi'n meddwl ar ddiwedd yr ail flwyddyn wnaethon ni sylweddoli bod yna gymaint o werth i'r math yma o gynllun, bod ni eisiau hangu hwn i fod yn rhywbeth mwy ysgol gyfan. Felly, os ydym ni'n ymlaen falle sleid nesaf, Yn ddatblygiad felly i hyn, i ni bellach wedi sefydlu tîm ymchwil o staff o fewn yr ysgol. Pam, fel Sonia si, oherwydd bod ni wedi gweld gymaint o werth yn yr hyn oedd yn digwydd ar lefel unigol o ran staff, a mae hynny'n dal i ddigwydd, o'n i wir yn teimlo bod yna le i gynnal astudiaethau ymchwil ehangach, dyfnach, oedd yn cynnwys mwy o ddisgyblion, oedd yn cynnwys mwy o lodau staff, oedd wirioneddol yn mynd i newid ac ar effaith ar bolisi a chysondeb o ran dysgu ag addysgu ar draws yr ysgol. Felly nawr i ni bob tymor yn penderfynu ar ffocws, ffocws eleni, enghraifft y tymor cyntaf yma yw datblygu sgiliau llafar a chywirdeb llafar yn disgyblion ni. Fel rydyn ni'n sôn, mae yna 90% o disgyblion ni'n dod â cartrefi di-Gymraeg, ac eto maen nhw'n dod i'r ysgol ac yn dysgu'n llwyr drwy gyfrwng y Gymraeg, felly mae hwnna'n ffocws i ni y tymor yma. Byddwn ni fel tîm ymchwil wedyn yn gwneud y gwaith ymchwil dwfn, felly i ni darllen. Mae gyda ni amser ar ein hamserlenni ni i wneud hynny, felly ein brief ni yw ymchwilio, ymchwilio, ymchwilio. I ni wedyn yn gofyn i'r staff am wirfoddolwyr i fod yn rhan o'r cynllun, a mae yna nifer fawr o staff ertegwch yn gwirfoddoli i fod yn rhan o'r prosiect ymchwil. I ni wedyn yn anfon holiaduron i weld beth yw'r sefyllfa bresennol, holiaduron i'r disgyblion ac i'r aelodau staff. Wedyn i ni'n creu gwersi, a mae'r athrawon yna wedyn yn cael cyfle i dreialu strategaethau ar sail y gwaith ymchwil. I ni wedyn yn gwerthuso, a wedyn i ni newid polisi ar sail yr arferion cryf sydd yn dod o'r gwaith ymchwil. Felly, i ni dal yn gwneud y gwaith ymchwil personol, ond mae hwn falle yn lefel ychwanegol nawr o ddyfnder falle i'r ymchwil ac i'r cysoni na yr arferion da ar draws yr ysgol. Ac at y sleid ola felly, os yna ni symud ymlaen, o ran eleni a'r dyfodol, i ni wedi, mae'r cynllun wedi esblygu hyd yn oed ymhellach. Dal dim graddio, dwi ddim yn meddwl ewn ni fyth nôl i raddio gwersi. Mae bob un o'r staff yn dal i benderfynu ar ei ffocws dysgu ag addysgu personol. Mae'r tîm ymchwil wedyn yn dal i wneud astudiaethau ymchwil ar lefel ehangach o fewn yr ysgol. Ond rai datblygiadau mwy diweddar falle ydy y cynllun naid. Gaethon ni gyfarfod neu hyfforddiant gwych gyda Chris Moyes 2 flynedd yn ôl ac yn dilyn y model grow. Ni wedi cyfieithu fe i naid, sef nod ar ddiwedd y dydd, beth sy'n digwydd ar hyn o bryd, beth yw'r realiti'r sefyllfa ar hyn o bryd, yr opsiynau wedyn, felly mae aelod o staff wedyn yn gallu ystyried beth yw'r opsiynau sydd ar gael iddo fe neu hi i ddatblygu yr elfen yma o ddysgu ag addysgu ymhellach, a wedyn maen nhw'n dewis be maen nhw'n mynd i arbrofi, be maen nhw'n mynd i wneud mwyn gwella hyd yn oed yn fwy fyth yn y maes yma. Felly, o ran adborth ac o ran dysgu proffesiynol, pari eto, ond mae'r sgwrs proffesiynol i gyd o gwmpas naid. Dyna beth sy'n gyrru ein dysgu proffesiynol ni erbyn hyn. I ni hefyd wedi creu llyfryn dysgu proffesiynol i'r staff sydd eto yn rhoi QR codes iddyn nhw, yn cyfeirio nhw at lefydd gwahanol i fynd ar gyfer i gwaith ymchwil nhw, a wnaethon ni lawnsio hwnna nos Lun, a gobeithio bydd y llyfryn yma nawr yn adnodd ychwanegol i'r staff wrth iddyn nhw fynd ati i ddefnyddio'u gwers nhw, i gwers dysgu proffesiynol nhw, i wneud y gwaith ymchwil yna ac i sicrhau newid. Felly, dyna grynodeb eitha cyflym i chi. Dwi'n sylweddoli bod fi wedi rithro falle dros ambell i fanylu, felly os oes unrhyw gwestiynau bydden ni'n hapus i'w hateb nhw, ond falle ddim ni i orffen falle, mynd nôl falle'r dyfyniad dyna William, a'r syniad yma bod ni'n gyson eisiau gwella ni'n hunain, ond wedyn yn rhoi y perchnogaeth yna i staff i wneud hynny dros nhw i hunain. Diolch Ann.
Diolch Rhian. That was again really useful, and I think what's positive to see there is whilst we see links between what we've seen today, and I suppose stealing Elspeth's word from earlier, that golden thread running throughout today, I think what was key is that both schools that have just talked about developing teaching have talked about developing a clear understanding of what effective teaching is for that school, and then that helps them to choose any aspects of research they may want to engage with to fit their school for their current context and purpose. Just one question, if I ask Rhian first and then go to Elspeth, if she can turn the camera on in a second. One question that we've had is just, how did you help staff to feel empowered? Both of you talked about helping staff take ownership of things. How did you help them feel empowered? So if I ask Rhian first and then Elspeth.
Iawn I fi ateb yn Gymraeg, so cef mi dean sy'n welsh. Dwi'n meddwl mai un o'r pethau mwyaf pwerus o'n safbwynt ni yw pa bynnag gynllun i ni roi ar waith, bod na hyd werthusiad a bod na holiadur a bod na gyfle i staff i roi barn nhw. I ni yn rhoi holiaduron allan yn anhysbys, achos i ni moyn i staff i fod yn rydd i feirniadu os ydyn nhw eisiau, i fod yn onest am gynllun. Ac os oes angen newid, dwi'n meddwl falle, chod un o'r pethau ni wedi gweld yw o flwyddyn i flwyddyn, ni wedi gorfod addasu pethau a newid pethau, a falle rhoi llais i'r staff i fod yn rhan o hynny yw un o'r pethau mwyaf pwerus a mwyaf gwerthfawr iddyn nhw. Maen nhw'n gweld bod eu llais nhw'n cael ei glywed a bod ni'n newid pethau ar sail i adborth nhw mewn gwirionedd. Felly, byddwn ni'n gweud falle mae'r adborth a'r cyfle i werthuso ac i leisio barn yn anhysbys os nhw eisiau yw'r un o'r pethau ni wedi gweld sy'n gweithio yn eitha ffeithiol.
So they're involved in that process of evaluation. That's helpful. Thank you. And Elspeth?
So I just, I think first of all is everything we've done and the best things that we've done around teaching and learning, we've co-constructed. It's been so important that right from the get-go, they've been involved, because both schools now have a peer inquiry cycle, which is, and because they now have their research projects, which run in it alongside the whole school self-evaluation, it's almost like you give them that little bit of trust and empower, and they fly. We almost can't stop them observing each other. But also, because the most recent iteration of our sort of peer review, peer inquiry cycle, we're doing student learning experience trails. And when you get to the point where staff are saying, I hope they're not going to be announced, so that they are and focusing on learning, but also just listening to staff and involving them all the way through and reminding them what our core purpose is, identifying that best practice, letting them lead the briefings, letting them share to the governors, letting them lead on professional learning. At Crossy, they've done professional learning on AFL tonight. Well, I haven't been there. And it's been one of my middle leaders alongside one of my assistant heads that are leading on that. And I think that's very important. And obviously find your champions as well that will show it's not scary. And I think the other thing is we removed judgments from anything years ago. So it was a formative process and it's all about that. And then you come back to the moral purpose. So I think those are some of the things where staff have just taken real ownership of our pedagogical journey.
Thank you for that. That's really helpful. And I just had one more specific question just for you, Rhian. It's just when you were introduced to research teams, someone has asked, did they replace the staff research and professional learning partners, or is it in addition to that work?
No, it's in addition. So every member of staff still has their own personal teaching and learning focus and their personal research project. What we saw that it was really difficult maybe to encompass all 50 different mini research projects to everyday life in school. They weren't deep enough. They maybe didn't actually incorporate as many students as we wanted to. So we needed an extra layer of in-depth research based on our school priorities, really. So no, it's added on. So and it's but we do have the research team do have 8 lessons non-contact throughout the 2 weeks, and we meet together. So it's based on, to be fair, we went out to Olchfa School in Swansea. They've had a research team for many years, so it was really nice to have a chat with them, sit down with them, see what works really well for them. So you know, to be fair to them as well. Yeah, it's something that's extra and really interesting, though. You know, if there's any way you can have those conversations, it's been invaluable, really. It's been, yeah.
Thank you for that. Thanks, guys. And I'll give your voice a rest now, Rian. So hopefully it recovers in time for tomorrow. We've just had one general question before we bring this to a close, which I'll respond to. Someone asked earlier that we have talked about, and a lot of schools have mentioned, about the importance of subject knowledge underpinning decisions, and also about the placing learning at the heart of everything schools do. And someone has asked us, do we mean content and the subject content by that? And what we're saying in this is we're not, you know, whilst the content or activities maybe in other aspects, the way schools develop their learning and approaches and their teaching might differ. What we do see as a common theme where this works well is that schools underpin their decisions by what they want pupils to learn. So they start by thinking about that at the beginning before they begin developing their teaching and curriculum. So hopefully that just clarifies that a bit more now. So what I'd like to say now is I'd just like to thank once again Ellen, Emma, and Rian, who have spoken to us today. We really appreciate them giving up their time, and all of you that have joined us for giving up your time in what we know is a really demanding period for you. We hope that you found this useful. And as I said, once again, thank you very much to those schools for your really informative presentations. I'm sure they'll be of use to everyone that's joined today. So now I'll just pass off to Michelle to end the webinar.
Okay, so in conclusion, it was again a thank you for joining us that Alan's already done. So really my job is just to ask you to join us again on the 7th of December. We'll be starting to look at content in that webinar. So we're going to look in depth at how schools have been trialling and evaluating authentic learning experiences. And hopefully we'll have 4 different schools join us then. So once again, thank you, and we look forward to seeing you in December.